All right. So my name is Kristen again. I'm with Circular Triangle. Um, I feel like y'all probably are familiar with the principles of a circular economy. I like Ellen MacArthur Foundation's use of the principles of reuse, reduction, and regeneration. It's really about designing systems that don't have waste as the end. They have a way to bring their products back into use. So we're going to talk about textile waste today. One of the jobs that I had was with a textile collector, one of the largest in the Southeast. It's actually Green Zone Recycling. They've got bins everywhere. And it really opened my eyes to the way that textile recycling systems work and the extraordinary quantities of textile waste that we have. EPA estimates that we landfill about 11 million tons of textile waste annually. Now, y'all know that's not frequently updated. So this is 2018 data. I can only imagine it's gone up because we keep making a lot more clothes than we wear. So there's a lot in the landfill. There's also a lot that gets recycled, but those streams are unfortunately very much dependent on either export and downcycling. So there's lots of ways to recycle things, and some of them are better at maintaining value of products than others. And textiles, unfortunately, is one that we'll see it's very hard to keep the value of textiles in recycling streams. So I'll tell you kind of about what our options are right now. So our biggest option for these recycled textiles is straight reuse. So you'll see donation bins at businesses, at gas stations, at city and county recycling centers. It's usually not curbside textile recycling. You have to go drop it into a bin somewhere. And there'll be bins that say things like, put in your used clothes and shoes. So what ends up in those bins is called credentialed clothing. So you can see these big bales of stuff. That's just clothes that was put straight into a bin. What makes credentialed clothing special is that nobody sorted through it. So you'll get a mix of straight trash along with really nice things that still have tags on them and have never been worn. So that's a commodity. People buy and sell that. You can see here, this one's from Canada. Connected, and they'll say things like, we're at fancy neighborhoods, to try and make it seem like their credentialed clothing has more value than somebody else's. So fine. Most of that, some of it might get sorted here. Some of it will get sorted at its destination. Most of it ends up overseas. It used to usually go to the West African countries. They had some back and forth on what they wanted to import. And now a lot of it is being funneled down South America. There's too much of it. So there's way more that we are sending to these used clothing markets than they can use. So a lot of it ends up as trash. There's been a lot of really great journalism on this. I think this picture of the sad cows on top of the pile of clothing trash is from the BBC article. But lots of news organizations have done uncovering journalism about what's happening to your clothes after they end up in the bin. I will say too, there is a lot of this is a way that most of the clothing gets reused. So there is reuse in this market. They're just so overloaded with stuff. A lot of it ends up as trash. So that's one big piece of the textile recycling puzzle. The other one is mostly downcycling. So rags have been around for a long time. It's a great way to reuse textiles, but a lot of these end up like mechanics use them a lot to clean up grease spills. These are not things that you'll always be laundering and reusing forever. That's great if you do that in your house, but a lot of the industrial rags are going to end up being trash eventually as well. And then this here is called shoddy. This is a bunch of shredded textiles. Lots of uses for this, from stuffies to home insulation. It's a great product. There's just a limit to how much market there is for shoddy. So it's harder to find someone who wants old textiles for this because they have so many sources. And these are some local-ish companies that make these products. There is a lot of new technology coming out that will be improving these recycling processes. We'll talk about a couple local ones in a minute. But there's a lot of challenges to what they call textile to textile recycling. So like, let's say we wanted to create to design a piece of clothing with circularity in mind. We'd want to be able to wear that shirt, wear it till it starts to fall apart. And then we'd want to figure out a way to reuse that fiber to make something of equal value, like another shirt. So that's textile to textile recycling. There are so many challenges to doing that. A lot of them come from all the plastic that's in our clothing, the various blends, synthetic blends that we have, and then things like removing the zippers, the buttons, sorting by color, all that sort of stuff. So it's hard. A lot of cool people working on it. Premier is a PET recycling company out of Chapel Hill. They've got a neat technology that'll recycle lots of plastics, including those in clothing. Circ is another close one. They have some new technology for recycling like poly cotton blends that retains the value of both the polyester and the cotton thread. So that's very cool. Those are the sciencey types of textile recycling. The material return is a really great one out of Morganton. They are funded by the Industrial Commons, which is like a nonprofit network that's geared towards improving workforce development. And they work with brands directly to do take-back programs and create new threads. I think they're a really cool organization. So that's kind of some of the new technologies coming up the pipeline and some of the groups that are working on this issue, and there are a lot of them. And then there's also things that like cities and counties can do. Every city has different ordinances for clothing donation bins. It's insane. Some of them don't have any at all. Some of them have really restrictive ones. It's really easy to have ordinances that make it harder for people who run these companies irresponsibly to operate. So that's something that is worth looking at. Extended producer responsibility, that's going to affect a lot of industries. Hopefully it will affect textiles as well. And then just supporting businesses in the circular economy, supporting those local groups that have thrift stores, nonprofits like Note in the Pocket. They're a really great organization in Raleigh and Durham that do a lot of direct clothing donation and collection. So there's a lot of great things coming up the pipeline, but it is kind of a hard landscape to navigate. And then what we do as Circular Triangle, we focus on reducing the overconsumption of clothing and then keeping it local. Because when you take responsibility for what you have in your closet, you resolve a lot of these global issues that we see with textile waste. So we do clothing swaps. We've got them quarterly in Durham at Dissolver. We also do one-offs clothing swaps all the time. They're really fun. We have a couple creative reuse projects, including we just made a bunch of boomerang bags. Don't Waste Durham has a boomerang bag program that the woman who runs So Crafty, Tony, does. So that's a cool way to get reusable bags available to people, and also to use up all of the old clothes in my carport that are not good enough to donate that we get from clothing swaps. And then we're also piloting a fashion library program to try and encourage a fashion rental system. So those are kind of our projects around textile waste. And then before I conclude my little slides here, I just wanted to mention that we are going to be hosting our first sustainability summit in June. So that's exciting. We're getting things sorted, looking for sponsors, all that good stuff. So I'll definitely send a note out to this distribution list when we've got the Eventbrite going and got more details. So that's it. And I'm happy to take any questions. Usually people are interested more in one bit than another. So please feel free to ask any questions you have.
Yeah, Kristen, I had a question. Do you know like what % of the clothing that goes overseas ends up in the landfill?
Absolutely not. And anybody that tells you they have an answer, I would question where they got it from, because no one has any incentive. The people who are exporting that have no incentive to follow that down. You know what I'm saying? So they'll send whole bales and then people will buy parts of them. So it loses transparency really fast. And that's actually a really great point. There's a lot of really cool initiatives in textiles that's about tracking both where your item came from and then where it goes. So there's some cool, like, QR codes on the tags, stuff like that. So people can get a better answer to that question. So sorry, the short answer is no one really knows. It's a lot, but we don't really have a good way to gauge how much.
Thank you. That's really interesting that, it's not tracked, and it's obvious why it's not tracked.
Yeah,
Now that
well,
you
and
say it.
it's interesting too, because like these textile collectors have been in business for decades. Like these guys have been doing this for a really long time. And I don't think it was always the case that it was ending up as piles of trash overseas. Like I think for a while there was probably a pretty decent, supply to market ratio, but we blew it up over the past couple of decades with the rate of manufacturing of clothing. Like the quantities are just way out of control. And that's a cultural issue, really.
Right. That's that whole fast fashion concept, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Any kind of support that could come from organizations on our
Oh, that's awesome.
with DEC?
Yeah, well, I will say we really appreciate it. I know some of y'all put us in your newsletters and things like that occasionally. That's a huge help. Really appreciate that. Talking about and also encouraging people to do their own clothing swaps is a really easy, fun one. So if you're if you're ever having an event, any event is a good time for a clothing swap if you have someone that can deal with the leftovers. And it's a really great way. So like I had a clothing swap this weekend at a new place. It wasn't super well attended. We had a handful of people. I still walked away with 4 garbage bags full of clothing. So I'll have like 3 people come to a clothing swap and walk away with enough to clothe someone for a year. So any time that you can do a collection and have somebody that can bring it over to a place like Note in the Pocket, like it's so easy to accumulate this stuff and send it somewhere better. So I'd say that generally. And then I will definitely, we'd love to get a good turnout at the Sustainability Summit since it's our first one. So I'll definitely be following up with that.
Christian, probably this is a good time to also talk about the lunch and learns that we've just got started.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kim, we had this lunch and learn program. It's kind of similar to this where we have somebody come and talk. And then but we're doing it at Highwire. So it's a nice in-person event around lunchtimes. We do those on Wednesdays usually, Kim?
Thursday. That's the
Thursdays.
first Thursday. We're doing them quarterly.
Yep. So that's a fun one.
So we can certainly put out an announcement. The next one will be in April, the first Thursday in April. It's usually from 11:30 to 1, and people it's kind of a informal event, and so people kind of come and go. But yeah, like Kristen's saying, we usually have one person to come and talk about something related to textiles or related to circular economy topics. So yeah, we've just got them revived here, and our next one is going to be on planetary boundaries.
Yep. With Jennifer Kerrigan. Most of y'all know her, so that'll be fun in April.
Do you know about the company called TerraCycling that's associated with Rutgers University? And what they do. Like I have definitely, we did this through work for a while. We were collecting shoes and sending those. And then I've also done that personally, but I haven't sent clothes yet. And I was curious if you knew what they were doing with textiles and how, like, is that still a good thing to do? Since obviously that's usually an expense out of your pocket if you can't find a place local to take the clothes.
Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't looked at TerraCycle specifically because I didn't know that they took clothing and shoes, but I have heard of them and thought they were really good.
This is just one personal experience, but I ordered a box and it was a mistake. It was for wrappers anyway, but
Hmm.
it was a huge box. It came in plastic and it had a plastic lining. And so it didn't work for me for other reasons, but I saw other like comments about that on somewhere reviews. So just a heads up about that. So, and they're expensive. They're really expensive.
In a similar vein, the Material Return was one of the companies I had mentioned out in Morganton. So and they do a take back program that would be similar to like TerraCycle, but they're more specifically geared towards textiles. And right now, the only thing they can take from the public is socks. Smart Wool has a sock take back program. They also have great socks. Would recommend their socks. And I like that I know where it's going. Most of those recycling programs, if you're sending them back good clothing, it's probably going to end up with a textile collector and it'll probably be credentialed clothing, which is, it is what it is. But if it's not nice stuff, like if it's holy clothes or whatever, they're probably going to send it to shoddy, the shredded up textiles. That's what I expect the Material Return does with any socks that aren't of a fiber type that it can use. So I guess what I'm saying, my general rule of thumb when I'm looking at like, and now everybody has a take back bag or whatever. So I like places that can tell me what they're doing with it. Like Material Return, when I went on their facts, they had a lot of answers to questions like, what happens to this when you're done with it? Is this going back into a new product? When you go into like a Goodwill and you ask someone, where is all this going? They would have no idea. It's such a big company. Most of it's getting bailed out and shipped up, who knows where. So yeah, any local option is always better than a big one. And any option that has some sort of story it can tell you about where this is going that seems plausible is better than, like a donation bin with no website shouldn't exist. There's no reason for that. I wouldn't put my stuff in there. But
so I haven't been over there in a long time, but Durham, I thought had Durham City had a separate textile.
they do. Mm-hmm.
And where does that all go?
I can jump in on that one. Katie Hunt, I work with the City of Durham Department of Solid Waste. Yes, if you are a resident and you come to the WDRC, Waste Disposal and Recycling Center on Club Boulevard, also known as the Convenience Center, or if you've been around Durham long enough, sometimes it's just called the dump because the original landfill was located behind that space off of Club Boulevard. There's no fee for residents. You can come right in. Staff will direct you, and we contract with Green Zone, and so you can bring those textiles to a bin that we then dispose of for you. But to Kristen's point, supporting local thrift stores and other services is a laudable means of recirculating those textiles. But again, if you would like, or certainly if there are textiles that have holes or stains or otherwise are not usable in a thrift store sense, come to the WDRC free of charge. You can drop them in the box.
But what happens to that stuff? I mean, is it actually getting recycled or?
So the city contracts with the organization, with the company that Kristen was talking about, Green Zone.
Sorry, I'm sorry, say that again. Green Zone?
The city Green Zone is the organization Kristen was talking about, and that's the vendor that the city contracts for textile recycling.
Textile collectors, right? And yes. And it's really tempting to want to say, well, just never use a textile collector. And I think all the people on this call might take the time to do different things with their clothing, even to the point of paying for it. But it's really important to remember that when we're talking about a system that is having 11 million tons a year in the trash, it is going to be really hard to figure out a way to fix textile recycling without collectors existing, because getting the clothing from people's houses to wherever it needs to go that's what we find in clothing swaps. It's extraordinary how it just keeps coming. So I always encourage people who are doing that extra step of asking, what should I do with this, to look for local options, to make their own rags, to upcycle, to do whatever. People who come to me and say, I need to deal with a truckload, I'm like, I can't help you. You know what I mean? Like, you need a textile collector. It'll be credentialed clothing. There's really no better large option than that for end people like us right now. People who have tons and tons of stuff have more options. They could go to somebody to shred it up directly, that sort of thing. So anyway, sorry, the answer is always like, it's kind of complicated. There's not an easy answer, but.
Is there any kind of resource out there that sort of has compiled like all of the collectors to say, you know, they do this, they do that. I've used Retold, but when I sort of really drilled down to look at everything on their website, I was not guaranteed that my clothes weren't going to go overseas.
Right. There is not, but that is something that we get asked a lot and are working on, kind of like a resource list on our website that would have, I have this sock, what should I do with it? Can you tell me all my options? And that's a very baby project. So if anybody's interested in that or has opinions or is like, I have a great thing, just shoot us an email, because that is a big ask. And there's a lot of ways to go about working on that. So we're thinking on it, but it's still in the infant stage. So. And I'll drop my email in here too, if anybody.
I do a lot of international traveling, and I see these stores in almost every country I go to, USA Clothing or USA Goodwill or whatever it's called in South America or Africa. But I do see a lot of people wearing t-shirts and things from these clovers. So the clothing is used by quite a lot of people. I'm just curious about, you know, this is obviously a consumerism problem, and are there thoughts about how to change people's the way we buy, the way we sell, creating everybody go out and shop, you know? I mean, that's sort of the issue here, isn't it? I mean,
Clothing swaps are my favorite answer to that, because most people enjoy them. Like, it's a fun social activity, and it still lets you engage in the newness factor. Because we have enough clothes, you can change them out all the time. I think also making secondhand clothing cool is something a lot of people are working on. So it's kind of like the question of how to change a culture, and that's not a fast thing. But I think I think a lot of the things that we need to be doing that are happening. Like, I don't look at all this and think, oh, it will never change. I think, look at all these people. I talked to somebody at our clothing swap last weekend who had just taught themselves how to sew. They were so empowered by it, and they were like 24. You know, so it's not, I think a lot of these traditional slow fashion methods are becoming more popular, and we just have to talk about it whenever we can to the people we love. And I started giving things at Christmas from thrift stores. My family got a kick out of that, because it's like, you know, unusual stuff. So.
Kristen, talk about the fashion designer that's going to be involved in the fashion library.
Oh, the posh, yeah.
Yeah, and how she really was alarmed by all of this and how she wanted to help pitch in.
Yeah, we had a designer, Zainab. She does these beautiful water marbled art pieces and has designed this clothing line with them. And then she read a book about fast fashion and said, oh, this is terrible, and learned about this fashion library concept that's been very popular in Amsterdam. And so it's basically like a library for clothes, so you can borrow, you know. So that's where our fashion library pilot came from. And she's been reaching out to local designers and actually had 2 donate pieces of upcycled garments. One's an NC State design student, and she made this like really beautiful puff quilted jacket with upcycled materials. And Walla Mobe's the other one, and they made a really cool sweatshirt from a blanket. So it's been fun to kind of see that and be able to put those out there more. And that's the other thing that we're talking about with the resource list, is a list of people who upcycle things and where you can buy from them, because people are interested in it and it's kind of hard to find. So anyway, sorry.
Kristen,
Mhm.
clothes swap. This I've really never heard of. This presentation is interesting to me.
Oh,
I'm still, I got so many clothes. Still, like the more I give away, the more I have. So I am very interested in this clothes swap, and I'm gonna make sure I be there. So is it what I do? I bring clothes, bags of clothes, and I don't want to swap them with nobody else.
you
Take
don't
off.
you don't have to take anything. And
Okay.
honestly, you don't have to bring anything. I've had people just stop by and say, oh, I don't have anything to swap. I say, it's just less for me to bring home, because there's a lot of people like you, ma'am, that like have a bunch of stuff and they just need it to go somewhere else. And so clothing swaps are a really great alternative to dumping it in a bin.
Okay.
And it, you know, it's fun, and it all ends up with Note in the Pocket, which is a really great local organization that does direct community donations.
Well, I'm gonna pass this on. I'm gonna pass this summer on because I have a lot of friends. We all have clothes. I got like 500 pairs of shoes, 2 closets full of clothes. I don't have space in there to put another clothes hanger. The shelves are full, and my granddaughter
I
goes,
believe it.
"How do you buy so many clothes?" So I'm gonna make sure I be there and would bring a lot of my friends because this is interesting to me.
I got you. Well, we will keep an eye out for you, and feel free to email me too if you like, you know, need help picking up, or if you have too many. But I've met people at the outside the clothing swap with the car. If you know,
Okay.
just shoot me a note and we'll get
All right.
taken care of.
And thank you. This is totally interesting. Never even heard of it.
Well, I'm so glad. Hey,
Okay.
Dan.
Uh-huh.
Kristen, this is Dale. This is a great idea. This is awesome, especially to upend the fast fashion model. Are there other groups in North Carolina that are doing this as well? Is this the only thing going on in North Carolina, or is Charlotte, Asheville, Greensboro, any of these other places doing something like this?
I don't know about clothing swaps specifically, although I will say I had somebody come in who had lived in Seattle, I think, or Portland, one of those. And she said, oh, of course, clothing swaps were everywhere where I lived. I said, well, we can do that. This is not hard. So no, but I would love for there to be more. There are a lot of really cool groups doing things around textiles. Piedmont Fiber Shed is really neat, and they're trying to create a supply chain that's local for clothing. So like North Carolina grown cotton, dyed in North Carolina, manufactured here. That's a really cool one. But this is another reason we need a resource list, because I hear them and then they go.
Well, you hit on the other point I was going to make, which is North Carolina was a textile state, or has been a textile state, not as much anymore, but certainly this we could be a model for not only North Carolina, but for the country.
Definitely.
On this
There's also the nonprofit in Raleigh called Toward Zero Waste. So they address, you know, they have mending evenings where people come and sew together or make repairs on different types of clothing. So, and they seem to be pretty active and involved.
They do reusable bags too on those sewing groups, and they're like real deal sewing ladies. If you want to learn how to sew, they really are. It was cool to see all the things they know how to do.
Hello. Yeah, this is all really interesting and thought-provoking. And I'm one of the like other directions that I've been wondering about as you're talking is if there are either like local or further, any models, you know, of people who are doing, like a lot of the examples you've been talking about seem like they're either like very small and local of like, right, like I do clothing swaps with my like 15 friends every so often, or some of these much like larger companies and global change. And I'm wondering if there are other kind of still like regional, local generated from people who are using all of these things, but some like networking efforts, which I think like how you're describing the fashion and clothing library might be one of those examples of like it is people are contributing to this library and then you can check things in and out. But I'm thinking of other examples of like I think it was either Flock or SAF, one of the farm worker advocacy groups periodically does like shirt drives for migrant farm workers who are coming through. And I'm thinking about like ways that some of these efforts might be connected, or people who are in these different communities doing some of this work on and could be networking, still like doing things locally, kind of like consumer based, but networking for things that are like slightly larger scale or slightly longer term, like this annual larger clothing needs. I know that adds like a lot of logistical management to be scaling and networking things in that way, but I'm just wondering if you know of any other examples of people who are doing that work, or your thoughts.
I don't, there is not a lot of big network, which I think is a gap, and it could just be a gap in my awareness too. I'm always learning about new things, but I have not found there's a couple of groups like that, like people who are in textile recycling are a part of. One of them is called SMART, Secondary Materials and Recycled Textiles. They have no environmental position though. Like I went to a conference maybe 5 years ago and they were just starting to talk about like the circular economy as though it might change their industry, which it will. So it's their Note in the Pocket is the biggest clothing redistribution group I've seen. They just opened a second location in Durham, and they go through, I think their number was almost 300,000 pounds last year. So they have some heft in terms of capability, but it's really interesting to hear you talk about shirt drives for migrant workers, because I'd never heard of something like that. And I'd love to have that as one of my places I can take stuff. And also, I haven't worked at Green Zone for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years now, but I'm sure it hasn't changed much. And I was always getting calls for stuff that we couldn't deal with, like large quantities of whatever the logo needs to be cut out. There's just a lot of weird little textile recycling opportunities that are unmet because the people who run Green Zone are not connected to the migrant shirt drive or to Note in the Pocket or whatever. So anyway, so the point to that, Katie, is I think there's definitely a need for it. And it's something that, as we talk about resource lists, is I think a gap circular triangle might try to fill a little bit. But we're very grassroots, so our resources are slim. I'd love to find people already doing this and connect them, but yeah, there's a lot of people working on it separately. There is one really cool big group I want to mention called Accelerating Circularity. They're trying to solve kind of a nationwide supply chain by basically making recycled yarn easier to use. But their biggest goals are to end up with a garment that's like 40% recycled. So that's kind of our scale.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. And everything you're talking, I think the like working on things like this from a grassroots perspective is so helpful. Like you can get into so many more of the details and really find all of those local needs. And then it's always the question of like, how do you work on a larger scale and maintaining those abilities? So yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the work you're doing.
Thanks for the question.
Hey, thanks so much. Obviously, a lot of interest in all of this, and yeah, thanks for your work. And please feel free to share information on the chat and then also on the email list. So.
Awesome, I appreciate it.
Okay, so I think we can stop the recording now. And let's see, Karen has put something in the chat about an event. You want to talk about that, Karen, or?